Today I want to talk about Aristotle's typology of knowledge. That is, his classification of knowledge into three different types and the rationale behind it. And obviously Aristotle is very, very important philosopher. In fact, if we had to pick one philosopher who is equally important for understanding ancient philosophy and medieval philosophy and modern philosophy and medieval philosophy, whether it is a Christian philosophy or Islamic philosophy or Christian theology or Islamic theology, that would be Aristotle. So we'll be looking at different aspects of Aristotle, starting with very basics, just trying to develop our understanding until we are able to understand his system more thoroughly. So today we are going to look at his classification of knowledge and what is his rationale behind it. So knowledge. The Greek word is episteme. I think that's how you spell it, but you can check it. And some people translate it as science, and it's possible to translate it as science, but I would avoid translating into science because knowledge, or Aristotle's conception of knowledge, even though it has a lot of similarities with today's conception of science, and in fact today's conception of science partially developed based on Aristotle's idea or interaction with his ideas or dealing with his ideas, but still to me it seems that science today means something qualitatively different than what it meant for Aristotle. That's why I'll stick with the conception of knowledge without rejecting its translation into science out of hand. But I think one important thing which I think it's important is to try to understand different thinkers from different age in their specificity. Okay, so basic division of knowledge according to Aristotle is between theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, and productive knowledge. In theoretical knowledge, we are seeking truth for its own sake. That is, we are concerned with truth. And that's why theoretical knowledge is the highest branch of knowledge for Aristotle as to its worth, because for him, knowledge for its own sake is the most important thing. We'll look at his other reason why theoretical knowledge is the most worthy knowledge, or the best of knowledge. And practical knowledge is the application of knowledge to basically human conduct and human society. So ethics and politics will be part of that. And production is where not entirely, but production would be more to do with type of knowledge which are connected to what we call technology. Not entirely, but so for example, shipbuilding would be part of it, or architecture would be part of it, but also poetry and all those things would be part of that too. So this is his basic classification, and the most important one is theoretical, and then theoretical knowledge is divided into different types, and they have a hierarchy as well as theoretical knowledge. Types of knowledge has a hierarchy in the sense that theoretical knowledge is the best one, and then practical knowledge, and then productive knowledge. And in a sense, that comes from, so theoretical knowledge has different parts and they have hierarchy among them as well. Before we proceed, in a sense, this comes from Aristotle's conception of human being. Aristotle's conception. So humans for Aristotle are rational animals. And in a sense, theoretical and rational is the most worthy part in humans. So theoretical knowledge deals with the pure rational part of, in a sense we can say, pure rationality. On the other hand, as long as practical knowledge deals with human society and their conduct, it is also much higher than the other classification because it partakes in rationality to a certain extent, but it is applying it to objects which are not purely rational, like society, society. So that's something which humans and animals have in common, in the sense that we are social animals. And then the third one is production, where we use rationality, but only as a means to a particular end. And the ends as such, we are not judging them according to rationality, but they are purely based on need, or largely based on need. On the other hand, in practical philosophy, to a certain extent, we are judging means as well as ends based on reason. So that's why it's higher than productive. So that's the rough one, rough rationale. Not entirely true, but largely true. Okay, now let's go into his classification of theoretical knowledge, which is what interests me mostly here. Theoretical knowledge. So theoretical knowledge for Aristotle includes what he called theology, and number 2, ontology. And they are basically largely gathered under the thing metaphysics. And then number 3, you have what we will call natural sciences. Let's see, so that can be physics, although his conception of physics is more than a physics for him, because even the Greek word from which physics is derived mean nature. So in physics he deals with nature as a whole. But natural science is also study biology and also psychology and other things. But theology and ontology is basically part of theology as well. I'll come back to that. Is the highest is the most worthy or the most important part of theoretical knowledge, or most worthy part of theoretical knowledge. And then you have mathematics, and then we have natural science. So in mathematics you deal with, and the distinction between different theoretical sciences that Aristotle makes is basically based on the object they study, object and its worth. Really, and that's what, and whether those objects change or not, and that is related to actually the worth of object too. Because according to Aristotle, so basic difference between natural sciences and mathematics is, I get, natural science deals with objects which are susceptible to change, really. Susceptible. And change for Aristotle is a privation, in the sense that it's a sort of deficiency, in the sense that says that everything which changes requires explanations, and that explanation is to be sought in something outside that objects. So that object in that sense is dependent on that subject. So natural sciences are in the lower ladder because they deal with objects which are changeable, which are contingent, and they can't explain themselves. So their ultimate explanation must rest on something which is unchangeable, and that is provided by theology. So that's why natural sciences are in the lower ladder. And then mathematics, I guess mathematics is lower than theology because it deals with objects which are not fully existent in so they are, although they are changeable or unchanging, I think they are inert in the sense that they can't explain other things. So in that he is different from Pythagoras and Plato too, for whom mathematics was much higher in that respect. But what I said about mathematics, whether my explanation is adequate, I'm not sure. I'll need to look at it a bit more. But there's no doubt that it is higher than, mathematics is higher than natural sciences and lower than theology. Now theology, in Greek language mean God, and logos mean word, or we use logi to study. So it's a study of God or gods. But for Aristotle, it's the study of all divine things. And for Aristotle, it's not just the God who is divine, but also all the heavenly elements. So theology basically deals with the heavens, and that's why people have said that it's basically part of astronomy. Obviously God is the most perfect being in that respect, but all other heavenly objects are also part of theology. And So theology is not just the study of God in our sense of the word, but it is study of all divine things. And divine for Aristotle is all, heavenly beings or heaven, which is a lot of those things today are part of astronomy. So for Aristotle, they were these beings were. There are two things about them. They are pure forms, so there is no matter in that. And number two, they are unchanging. So God is unchanging. Number three, but they are active in the sense that they provide explanation and are the source of change for everything else. So God is the highest of these beings, and so God for Aristotle or Aristotle's disciples among Christians and Muslims is unmoved mover. So God doesn't move, because then if he moves, then he would have deficiency and all that. So, and this concept of theology as things which are perfect don't move had a huge impact on Muslim and Christian theology, especially Muslim theology, because like not just Mu'tazila but also Asharis and Maturidis, even to this day, they believe that God doesn't move, etc., because of this basically Aristotelian, because they think if they attribute movement to God, then that would be a privation and deficiency, and obviously God can't be deficient. And more empirical among Muslim and Christian theologian, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah, criticized that on the basis that for Arabs of prophet times, a thing which doesn't move is a sign of deficiency rather than perfection. But he is sort of exception. More empiricist bent of mine is sort of an exception among the mainstream Islamic theology, whether it is Mu'tazila or Asharis or Maturidis, etc. So that was just a tangential. So theology deals with beings which are divine, so they don't move, but they are active in the sense that they're a source of movement. Then you have the whole problematic of demonstrating how a mover can unmoved mover can move something else. It's not that acute for Aristotle because it's just a philosopher, but for more like Muslim philosophers like Ibn Sina is a huge problem, and his followers in Islamic world. So the only thing which is left is ontology. So how does that fit into that? Ontology is for Aristotle the science of knowledge of beings, all beings, qua beings. So in their aspect as existing things, so qua existing things. So in that sense, it's the most general branch of knowledge, because it studies all existent things as far as they are existence. The absolute generality is part of ontology, and Ghazali, when he defines Ilm al-Kalam in his Al-Mustasfa, basically his definition is the same as Aristotle's definition of ontology. So, in that sense, for at least in Al-Mustasfa, for Ghazali, al-Kalam mean what ontology is for Aristotle. But that doesn't mean that ontology studies, humans or cups or animals as far as they exist. It studies existence as such and the dependence of existence on God ultimately. So in that sense, it is part of. So ontology, although it looks at all beings as long as they are existent. So in that sense, it's very general. But what is study is existence, and then it's dependent on God. And because it is dependent on God, because God is the one who gives existence to everything else through his active principle. That's why ontology is part of the study of theology. Now, you might have noticed that there's no logic in there. Although Aristotle doesn't have anything called logic in it. But he has different books which study things which we call logic. And it's not one book. So there is logic. Prior analytics is mostly deductive logic and things. And you have quite categories which part is logic, part is ontology. And it was only in later times that his books which were deemed related to topics which we consider logic today were gather around the title organon, which means instrument. And that's why logic in medieval philosophy, and even most, not all, but most modern philosophers would call it an instrumental science, in the sense that we don't study it for its own sake, but it provides us instrument to think correctly. That's how Arab Muslim logicians define logic. So logic is what they call it. A logic is a science which helps you to avoid mistakes in thinking or thought, or something like that. So Aristotle doesn't have anything like logic, but it does contain things which were later collected under the title logic. So there's a debate about whether Aristotle believed in the conception of logic as an instrument. And if he did, then we don't have a problem. So we have three types of knowledge, and logic is prior to that, in the sense that it is an instrument of knowledge. But that debate is still unresolved. So this is Aristotle's classification of knowledge. We want to look at it. This is very basic, but we'll build on this. Thank you.